The mythical moss. The partially sentient moss had been sent to colonise Earth. Genetically modified to be naughty, it was up to its old tricks, moving from one place to another without being seen, or, more precisely, only being seen out of the corner of the eye. Every summer, city folk came in search of the mythical moss, divided in their opinions about whether or not it really existed. Some said they knew people who'd seen it, but when pressed couldn't actually name them. Others used it as an excuse to get away from the humdrum of everyday life and inject a bit of magic into their own lives. As far as the moss was concerned, the forest visitors provided it with the two things it craved most: the tiny morsels of rich city food dropped by its pursuers and the thrill of a chase. And this was a day that promised both. Hiding behind trees and in the undergrowth was what the moss loved to do, and over the years the awareness that playing with the humans could be dangerous had grown. But moss had to play to survive. It was built into their genes. And each time a moss played, the understanding of what humans meant by naughty deepened. Generation by generation, the moss adapted. The ground quivered. The humans were on their way, presumably to where they thought the moss had last been seen. It slid under the exposed roots of the nearest tree. The chase had begun. The dry leaves rustled and the dead branches on the forest floor cracked as the human party approached. The birds flew and the creatures fled, the familiar reaction to an invading group of bipeds with insatiable curiosity and no subtlety. Not everything ran away. There were plenty of modified plants and animals that had been released and then forgotten about, but they chose to hide. The humans only remembered the moss, or at least the myth of the moss. Still, that's humans, curious about the wrong things. It could feel their footsteps, and there was a faint odour of human on the wind. The moss tucked itself further under the roots until it was hidden by the fallen leaves that covered the base of the tree. It was a nice wet spot, and as it soaked up the moisture it became greener, making it even more difficult for the humans to spot. Clump, 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 here they came. Chitter-chatter, chitter-chatter. Shrinking its size, the moss waited for them. It knew they'd come. There was no other obvious route through the forest. It shivered at the thought of the spray the humans sometimes hunted with that would extract its sentience and reduce it to a shriveled up ball. Under the roots it hid, not knowing how rough the play was going to get. The noise grew louder and louder until it seemed to fill the whole forest. Not the single beautiful song of a bird or the symphony of creaking branches. No, it was a barrage of coarse, vulgar utterances with no discernible melody or meaning. They marched past, smelly and loud, destroying the tender forest floor with their great lumps of feet. The moss slid out from under the tree and sprung onto the back of a waiting rabbit, which took off at great speed along the forest floor. As they shot past the humans, an observant young boy spotted the moss and shouted, "There it is!" But by the time the others had swivelled their slow, cumbersome heads, the rabbit and the moss had disappeared. The rabbit stopped and the moss sprung onto the forest floor and once again slid under the roots of a nearby tree. It waited. With such predictability, the humans came lumbering along, disturbing the forest with their incessant noise. The moss waited for them to pass, slid out from its hiding place and retraced their steps. A trail of tasty droppings littered the path. Chocolate, its favourite, plus tiny bits of sandwich and crisps, as well as the occasional piece of fruit and a crumb of biscuit. It was a proper feast. Of course, there were the inevitable empty wrappers among the edible morsels, which it digested too, even though it got no nutrition from them. The rabbit returned and squatted down next to the moss. They liked each other's company. Back on the rabbit again, the moss sped through the forest, heading for its adventure with the humans. Swerving left, swerving right, leaping over obstacles and ducking under branches, the rabbit delivered the moss to its destination. Cautiously, it dismounted and crept along the forest floor, conscious that the humans might be hunting it with that dreadful spray. When it found them, they were lying down, sprawled out in a haphazard circle. It approached the nearest one, a female, and as it slid past, it brushed her leg. She stirred and looked around in that puzzled, sleepy way that humans do now that they're so conditioned to feel safe wherever they are. She was confused, not sure whether she'd imagined it or not. After a few minutes, she lay down again. A sleeping male was sitting propped up against a tree. As the moss brushed against his trouser leg, it secreted a liquid that dissolved a hole in the material. It trembled with delight. Its generation was the first with this ability to burn. The man woke up, and as he was pulling himself up straight, using the tree to help him balance, he noticed the hole in his trousers. "Oi!" he screamed. All of his companions woke up at the sound of his scream. "I've been attacked," he shouted to his attentive audience. "Moss! I've been attacked by the moss!" Hiding under a pile of leaves at the edge of the clearing, the moss watched and waited. The man took a spray can out of his coat pocket and danced around as if he'd suddenly found himself barefoot in the middle of a patch of thistles. "I'll find it and kill it," he shouted. The moss shrunk and expanded with delight in the way an accordion might play itself a joyful tune. "There it is," shouted the man as he ran to the opposite side of the clearing. He sprayed an innocent, non-sentient patch of moss with his ghastly spray. It withered and died right there in front of him. Some of the humans looked appalled at what he'd done, but most of them simply smiled and nodded. This was the moment for real naughtiness, to scare them and send them back to the city. Right on cue, the rabbit appeared. What they were about to do, they'd practiced loads of times, but this was the first time with real live humans. The moss leapt on the rabbit's back and they raced with lightning speed out into the clearing. As they broke out from the undergrowth, the human heads began twisting and turning to try and see what was happening. But the rabbit-moss combination was too fast for them. They weaved in and out and sometimes through the legs of the stunned humans. Occasionally the moss managed to touch and burn a piece of bare flesh. The humans were transformed from stunned curiosity to chaotic panic. Shouting, screaming and even weeping with pain, one by one they ran off into the forest, flapping their arms around as if they were trying to ward off an invisible attacker. For the moss, this was delicious. So delicious that it longed to be in the city among so many ripe humans. Maybe its descendants would have that pleasure. Job done. Another hunt foiled, another day of fun. They'd be back. Well, not them, but more of the same, curious humans determined to find the mythical moss. It tightened its body, and with the energy from the tasty morsels of human droppings, it expanded. Its spores exploded into the air and blew away on the breeze. The next generation in the making. A smarter generation. A generation that might make it to the city. What fun.